So today we're taking a deep dive into the April 6th weekly market outlook, specifically the week of March 30th to April 6th, 2026.
It's an incredibly dense document this week.
It is, yeah. So whether you're prepping for a high-stakes finance interview or getting ready to reallocate capital, or, you just want a serious shortcut to being deeply well-informed about the strange paradoxes in our economy right now, you are in the right place.
Glad to be here for this one.
We're skipping the noise, bypassing all the generic headlines, and getting straight to the actual vital signs of the global financial system.
And I should warn you, those vital signs require us to hold several totally contradictory concepts in our minds at the exact same time today.
Yeah, macroeconomics 101 is pretty much out the window, right?
Oh, completely. The typical cause and effect mechanisms you might have learned in school, they're essentially misfiring. We are observing sectors that demonstrate this historical bulletproof resilience operating right alongside metrics that are flashing, unprecedented structural breakdown.
It's wild.
Yeah. So to make sense of it, we really have to look past the top-line numbers and just tear apart the underlying plumbing.
Okay, let's unpack this. And let's start with the foundational engine of the economy, which is the American consumer and domestic manufacturing.
The perfect place to start.
Because to understand the bizarre anomalies in the broader market, we have to look under the hood here first. The U.S. economy right now is basically acting like a car dashboard with every single red warning light flashing.
Right, yeah.
We've got escalating military actions involving Iran. We have President Trump signaling potential further escalations targeting civilian infrastructure there.
Which is obviously a huge geopolitical risk.
Massive. And we have rising gasoline prices hitting the supply chain. By every traditional mechanism, the average American consumer should be terrified.
You should be hoarding cash.
Exactly. Hoarding cash, pulling back on discretionary spending. But the engine just keeps humming along at highway speed.
It's remarkably stubborn.
We just got the Conference Board's consumer sentiment for March. The consensus expectation was a drop to 87.9%, right? Because of all those compounding global fears.
Right, but it didn't drop.
No, it completely defied gravity. It came in at 91.8%, and retail sales actually bounced back with a 0.6% increase.
What's fascinating here is the divergence between the geopolitical risk and the actual domestic consumer behavior. It's just stark.
Yeah.
But the true mechanical shift in this week's data isn't just retail swiping credit cards. It's actually happening on the production side.
The manufacturing data, right.
Exactly. The ISM Manufacturing Index just registered 52.7%.
Yeah.
And to grasp why that specific number is such a seismic shift, you really have to look at the 3-year trend.
Because it's been pretty bleak, hasn't it?
Extremely. For 36 of the previous 38 months, that index sat below 50%.
Oh.
Yeah, and anything below 50 indicates sector contraction. So domestic manufacturing was essentially trapped in a 3-year shrinkage cycle.
I know.
Now we're looking at the third consecutive month solidly above 50%.
Yeah.
Manufacturers are suddenly, stockpiling raw materials, spinning up assembly lines.
They're preparing for sustained demand.
Precisely. It is a quiet but massive structural rebound in the industrial base. It entirely defies the narrative of global instability.
When the March CPI, the Consumer Price Index, finally catches up and reflects those energy shocks, is this humming engine just going to stall out?
The upcoming CPI report will absolutely be the crucible for that theory. Because inflation driven by energy prices doesn't just affect the consumer at the pump, right?
No, it hits everything.
Exactly. It bleeds into the logistics and transportation costs of literally every physical good they buy.
Yeah.
If the American consumer finally breaks, that energy shock will absolutely be the catalyst.
Right.
But, keeping strictly to the data we have in hand today, it shows an undeniable stubborn momentum.
Fair enough. But if factories are suddenly spinning up production to meet that stubborn demand, the logical assumption is they're going on a hiring spree to staff those lines.
You would think so.
But the employment data completely contradicts that logic. The job market is definitely not a humming engine right now.
No, it's incredibly erratic.
Let's look at Friday's job report. The market expectation was that the economy would add a modest 65,000 jobs.
Right.
The actual number came in at a staggering 178,000 jobs, just a massive beat.
Huge beat.
But simultaneously, the prior month was revised violently downward to negative 133,000 jobs.
The scale of that downward revision is just jarring, especially considering the initial report for that prior month was negative 92,000.
It's a huge miss.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bureau of Labor Statistics relies on initial survey data that often gets corrected when harder tax data comes in. But these misses are statistically massive.
Yeah.
And beyond the scale, The directional whiplash is what makes this moment genuinely historical.
Yeah, it's like a flickering light bulb.
Yeah.
For the past 10 months, the employment data has flipped signs every single month. Positive, then negative, then positive, then negative.
Alternating every month.
Exactly, 10-month alternating streak. And the previous record for that kind of monthly switchback was only 6 months. It creates this violent statistical turbulence where millions are hired and fired simultaneously.
That structural migration is precisely what's happening, but it's compounded by external shocks. The primary source report explicitly points to a convergence of these highly disruptive factors.
Like what?
Well, keeping it strictly to the report's analysis,
Yeah.
you have the uncertainty surrounding President Trump's actions on tariffs.
Right.
That forces international supply chains to constantly reconfigure. So companies are hiring when a route is safe and firing or furloughing when a tariff hits.
Makes sense.
You also have the escalating military situation in Iran, causing energy market volatility. And then, as you just pointed out, you have the severe swoon in traditional software companies reacting to AI.
It's all hitting at once.
Exactly. The net result is a labor market that simply cannot find a baseline.
So what does this all mean for the big picture? Because if you are tracking this data hoping for clarity on interest rates, the headline numbers are incredibly deceptive.
Very deceptive.
The official unemployment rate actually fell to 4.3%, which sounds fantastic if you just write a push notification on your phone.
Right. It looks great on the surface.
But looking closer at the mechanics, that drop is an illusion. The labor market isn't absorbing unemployed workers. The denominator of the equation is shrinking.
Exactly.
The labor participation rate fell to 61.9%. So the unemployment rate dropped simply because a massive cohort of people gave up, dropped out of the workforce entirely, and stopped being counted.
The math behind the unemployment rate totally masks the reality of workforce exhaustion. But financial markets operate on algorithmic reactions to headline numbers.
They just see the top line.
Yeah. Because that top-line job growth number, printed at a positive 178,000, the broader financial consensus violently repriced the cost of capital.
Which means rate cuts are off the table.
Pretty much. Last week, the market priced in an 86% chance of no cuts.
And now?
Today, it's sitting at a 90% probability that the Fed holds rates exactly where they are for the rest of the year. These surprisingly high positive job numbers make it impossible for the Fed to justify loosening monetary policy.
You have a historically schizophrenic job market where workforce participation is actually dropping.
Right.
Traditional financial mechanics dictate that the stock market should be tanking. Investors should be fleeing to the safety of government bonds or just holding cash.
That's what the textbooks say.
But instead, the market just delivered a massive global relief rally. Across the board, markets completely ignored the geopolitical threats.
Wild.
Large cap was up 4.2%, small cap was up 5.2%. The Nasdaq jumped an incredible 5.8% after 5 straight down weeks.
This raises an important question, though. The market's total immunity to these macro shocks forces us to re-examine what the quote-unquote public market actually represents today.
What do you mean?
Well, the indices we track daily, they're measuring a shrinking pool of assets. The actual number of listed, publicly traded companies in the United States has fallen by more than a third since the mid-1990s.
Wow. By a third. So companies are just staying private significantly longer.
Exactly. Because there is an absolute ocean of private venture capital available. They don't need to endure the regulatory headache of a traditional early IPO to raise funds.
Which brings us to a massive structural shift in how value is generated in 2026. Because an enormous portion of the real value in our economy is incubated and locked up in these private venture-backed companies. Here's where it gets really interesting. This dynamic has birthed a new classification in finance, the Pegasus.
Yeah, we spent the last decade tracking unicorns, startups valued at over $1 billion.
$1 billion seems quaint now.
It really does. The Pegasus represents an entirely different magnitude. A Pegasus is a private firm that reaches an initial public offering valued at over $1 trillion.
The scale of this is just hard to wrap your head around, but the collective value of just the 10 largest venture-backed companies has now soared to nearly $3 trillion combined.
It's immense.
And according to the source material, we are actively tracking 3 specific companies preparing to go public in the next year, any one of which could be the first Pegasus.
Right. You've got SpaceX, which internal metrics suggest could be valued up to $1.75 trillion.
Wow.
And then you have OpenAI and Anthropic, If you were an institutional investor, you are desperate for exposure to these assets, and the regulatory bodies are fully aware of this shifting gravity.
So the SEC is trying to lure them out.
It's exactly. The Securities and Exchange Commission is actively pursuing strategies to reduce the regulatory burdens of being a public company, specifically to court these massive entities out of the shadows.
What kind of reductions?
They're exploring moving from mandatory quarterly earnings filings to just twice-a-year filings, along with stripping down various disclosure mandates.
I'm making it easier for them.
Right. The SEC recognizes that if these trillion-dollar engines of innovation remain permanently private, the public markets risk becoming basically a secondary market for legacy businesses.
The mechanics of a Pegasus actually landing in the public market are wild to think about, though, especially if you have a passive 401k or a retirement account tracking an index like the S&P 500.
Oh, it's going to change everything.
Because the S&P 500 is weighted by market capitalization. The bigger the company, the larger its share of the index. So if a $1.75 trillion behemoth like SpaceX or OpenAI suddenly drops into the S&P 500, passive index funds, which mechanically buy whatever is in the index, will be forced to immediately purchase billions of dollars of that new stock.
Exactly.
The sheer gravitational pull of a Pegasus will permanently skew the entire index heavily toward growth.
But the truly alarming detail in our source material isn't what happens when these companies go public. It's the systemic rot they are currently creating in the private markets right now.
Yes, the hidden crack. Because while private equity is incubating these trillion-dollar Pegasus companies, that exact same private ecosystem is hiding a massive risk.
A huge one.
On the public side, the bond markets were totally stable this week. The 10-year Treasury yield actually fell slightly to 4.33%. But beneath the surface, in the opaque world of private credit, institutional investors are getting seriously spooked.
And for good reason.
Roughly a third of all private credit loans are tied directly to traditional software companies. And here is the mechanical failure. Legacy software companies rely on selling thousands of user licenses, basically charging per human seat.
Right, the traditional SaaS model.
But when a company deploys an AI agent that can do the work of a 50-person accounting team, that legacy software company suddenly sells 2 licenses instead of 50.
Their recurring revenue evaporates practically overnight.
And they can no longer service the debt on their private credit loans.
Exactly. You know, private credit grew rapidly over the last decade by operating largely outside the stringent capital requirements of traditional banking.
They were unregulated, mostly.
Pretty much. They offered flexible, floating-rate debt to software companies, assuming those recurring revenue models were bulletproof.
But they aren't.
No. The advent of generative AI has completely invalidated that assumption. Investors are waking up to the reality that the collateral backing billions of dollars in private credit is rapidly becoming obsolete technology.
Okay, wait. Let me push back here. Illiquid questionable loans backed by failing underlying assets, followed by a sudden realization of structural risk leading to investors panicking and trying to pull their funds out all at once.
I know where you're going with this.
I mean, if I'm an investor reading these tea leaves, the mechanics of the situation sound completely identical to the setup of the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychological parallel is definitely immediate.
Yeah.
And the underlying asset failure is very similar.
Right.
However, the consensus says this is not 2008 because the mechanical plumbing of how this debt is held makes an overnight collapse highly unlikely.
How so?
Well, in 2008, the toxic subprime loans were held on the balance sheets of systemically critical banks, right?
Okay.
Banks that rely on the ability of depositors to withdraw cash at any moment.
Yeah, and interbank lending.
Exactly. So when the mortgage assets proved worthless, the banks became insolvent overnight, poisoning the entire global financial bloodstream.
So a classic domino effect driven by the demand for immediate cash. How does the structure of private credit prevent that?
These illiquid loans are held by private equity firms and specialized credit funds, not traditional depository banks. Their capital comes from a highly concentrated base of pension funds, sovereign wealth, and ultra-high net worth individuals.
Okay.
Crucially, because these funds invest in hard-to-sell loans, their contracts feature structural fail-safes called gates.
Gates.
Yeah. An investment firm can legally restrict withdrawals. They strictly limit liquidations to a maximum of, say, 5% of a fund's value per quarter.
Oh, wow. So the investors might realize the underlying software loans are failing and they might want their money back, but the private equity fund simply locks the door.
Exactly.
You literally cannot trigger a bank run because the mechanism to withdraw the capital is legally gated.
It traps the panic in slow motion. The funds will slowly bleed out these liquidations at 5% a quarter, avoiding the need to fire sale assets at rock bottom prices.
It buys them time.
It buys them time to restructure the loans or wait out the storm. So the consensus right now is that this structural gating keeps the problem isolated from the broader banking system. It isn't an overnight systemic threat. But as critical thinkers, we have to recognize that a slow-motion crisis can still spread contagion. If the underlying asset rot, which is being driven by AI obsolescence, is deep enough, bleeding out 5% a quarter will eventually erode the balance sheets of the pension funds and institutional investors holding the bags.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
And the through line is undeniable contradiction. We examined a surprisingly resilient consumer powering a quiet resurgence in domestic manufacturing, completely ignoring the flashing red warning lights of geopolitical escalation and rising gas prices.
Yeah.
We unpacked a labor market suffering from historic, unprecedented whiplash driven by AI restructuring and tariff uncertainty, which has essentially zeroed out the chances of the Fed cutting interest rates this year.
Yeah.
And we explored the massive structural disconnect in the financial markets. Public indices rallying as listed companies vanish, while the private markets prepare to unleash trillion-dollar Pegasus IPOs, even as the AI technology powering those behemoths fractures the foundation of the private credit market. Keep dissecting the underlying mechanics, keep pushing past the top-line data, and keep connecting the dots. We'll catch you next time.